what do we eventually hope to learn from this research? The main thing is, are post-prison neighborhoods consequential for recidivism and employment? So if neighborhoods matter a lot for how people do after prison, then that might have some important policy consequences, since for people on parole, technically the Michigan Department of Corrections controls where they can live. It also has implications for where we should provide services, what neighborhoods should get those services, and so on. Can these neighborhood effects explain the racial disparities? What's the relationship between how you do and whether you go back to the same neighborhood or even the same household where you were before prison? It can be a double-edged sword. Those can be supportive social environments, but if they're criminogenic social environments, then it can flip the other way. Another question is, what predicts success in achieving stable living arrangements? So how do people move from couch surfing and living in homeless shelters and other institutional settings to having a stable home base in which to rebuild their lives? And sort of the long term is, we've been spending a lot of effort and time getting this information out of the parole agent's case notes. It's all there to be used. If this information turns out to be important, then this might be another tool for supervision. So instead of just knowing what someone's individual history is, knowing more about the social context that they find themselves in might help us to better target the services that they need, or target services to those environments. And the last thing we're doing is we're trying to facilitate evidence-based practice in Michigan by building up sharing of data and ideas. We're working on putting together a collaborative of researchers working on these kind of issues, and hoping to expand some of the work we're doing in the Osborne. We hopefully will do in the Osborne neighborhood to a kind of a more Detroit community monitoring system, so we can have information about neighborhoods in Detroit. Okay, I'm going to stop there because we definitely want to get your questions and your suggestions. If you don't get a chance to ask today or talk today, please email us as well. One of the motivations for us coming here today is that when you're kind of an academic doing research, you can be in a little bit of a bubble, and we want to hear what you guys think is important or interesting about these issues that we're talking about. So we're looking forward to your comments and questions. Thanks.
I'm curious to see about your post-prison experiences in the interview sample. You found that several people did find employment after incarceration.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how did that relate to their successfully staying out of prison. And do you have any figures to see how salient employment affects recidivism?
Yeah, that's a great question. In general, there is a literature where people are trying to look at this question. Do people who get jobs, are they more likely to desist from crime? And there is a positive association between those two things. The question is that causal? Right? If we were to just sort of go out and actually give people jobs and drag them to work, would that reduce their recidivism, or is it something about the people that they're both more likely to recidivate, less likely to recidivate, and more likely to get a job? So it's definitely a tricky thing to tease out. There were certainly cases where, in the interview data, where people were getting in trouble in part because they didn't have any money or any resources. Committing property crimes and things like that to keep themselves going. On the other hand, there were people who were doing great job-wise, but screwed up other ways. One example is if all of a sudden you have a lot of money in your pocket and you have a history of drug addiction, that can sort of lead to a relapse by itself. So it's complicated. Yeah. I'm sure Jeff has something to say.
Yeah, let me just make 2 points about that. One is that the amount of employment that we have checked off there can be a little bit misleading, because most of that is not stable employment. It's very transient. And this is just a marker of whether they had any employment at all, even if it was informal and they weren't on the books, and even if it was just for a day or two. So that's point number one. And I do think that most of the people in our sample who have had the more stable employment situations have been the ones who have been more successful. As Dave said, there is a big issue in the literature about where the causality is running, but there's clearly an association. And I just wanted to end with one vignette that kind of Dave was referring to. There's one gentleman that I'm following, I'm studying, who I've actually become good friends with, and he was in a transitional jobs program. At the same time, he was enrolled in a community college trying to get a professional degree. I'm sorry, it was a professional program to actually become like an auto mechanic, I think it was. And several things happened simultaneously. He was doing very well. He was also in a residential drug program that was providing him with housing, and he had this transitional job in a factory, and he had his education. He was doing very well in school. Everything was going his way. Two things happened. One of them was that he got a student loan check in the mail, $3,000. He had never seen anything like that before, and the first thing that he could think of was crack. And that's in fact what he did. The other thing was that the transitional job program happened to end at the same time. And so he went on a crack binge and started off a cascade of just really negative things that landed him back in prison eventually. And he spent about 6 months there, and actually, I'm pleased to say, is now one of our potential success stories. He's gotten out. He's on MPRI. In fact, that's MPRI was putting him in that jobs program to begin with, and he's in a much more stable employment situation and living situation. Another theme that Dave referred to is relationships, and he actually ended up marrying someone that he met when he was in that drug program, I think, who herself was on parole at the time, which is, I'm not going to reveal who this person was because that's not exactly legal to be fraternizing with other parolees, but it shows you how relationships, informal relationships, really matter, and they can be risky in some sense if they encourage more substance use and more illegal behavior, but they can be very supportive too. And in this case, it's fortunately turned out that way.
As you peel back on the employment, are you looking at anything relative to retention and that correlation between success, how long they're on the job?
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. So let me just say one more word about where we're at in this study. We have more data than we've shown you thus far, but a lot of it is very preliminary. Right now, we've focused most of our efforts on trying to learn about recidivism, and I can just say the initial findings, the very, very, very preliminary findings seem very interesting, and we hope to come back and talk more about those, but we are very aware of how preliminary they are, and that's why we're not talking about them. We haven't done much work on the employment piece yet because we haven't collected all the data, but what we will have is complete records of everybody's from the Unemployment Insurance Agency that shows you for the formal employment what the story is, how long they've been in the job, and what dates. And then we also have from the parole agent case notes a lot of other descriptive information about all kinds of work that people have. In terms of retention, in the people that we've been studying, I guess I would just come back to my point before, which is actually most of the guys that I've studied, I don't know about your case, Dave, that have latched onto jobs, that the employer can afford to keep them hired, they've done all right. They've actually been pretty good employees. And I can't think of anybody offhand, maybe one person who might have been fired from a job or laid off for some kind of behavior problem. But most of them were really eager to work and get out there, but they were having a hard time finding stable work.
Yeah, the felony record really makes it hard for them to find jobs, and it can be really very discouraging if you could sort of put in all these applications and get no responses. The one thing I've learned is that for the ones who have been successful, either they have some sort of very special skill that is in high demand, or they just have this sort of strategy of persistence. One guy I've been studying, all he would do all day was go and apply for jobs. He would just go around everywhere he could and put in applications. And if you put in 400 or 500 job applications, you will get some call back, even if it's for a minimum wage job, which he was willing to take. And he was able to sort of use that strategy to sort of build up a little bit of a track record and work his way up. And then managed to get in some unrelated trouble and lose